Hello, this is Flesh Beyond Reckoning, the video version of my post for the Singing Homer Substack in the series called Homer in English. On Substack, you will find full performances of this passage in Greek and in English. This one is on Odyssey 10, lines 406 to 502. Odysseus learns from Circe that he must travel to the underworld, the house of Hades, invisible. His name seems to mean invisible or unseen, Awidas, which is also the home of his consort, the awesome Persephone. Not for the first but only the latest time in the Odyssey, the woman and wife appears to be in charge of house and realm. For a number of reasons, a first-time listener might be taken by surprise, even shock, at this disclosure on the bed of Circe. We have so far been encouraged to think that the arrival on this bed has been a significant one, a destined one, even a kind of climactic achievement. Perhaps one that would put any sort of further homesickness into perspective. But no. The need for home reasserts itself into the blissful consciousness, and without warning, this triggers the revelation from Circe that she must pass along the soul of her mortal pilgrim wanderer to the ministry of a goddess even more dread. Not only is sexual union with the wise goddess no sort of transcendence over one's origins, it seems, nor even a substitute for that home. No, he must head back. But it turns out Odysseus cannot even think of reaching his humble Ithaca and the woman living upstairs there, unless he first travel to the undiscovered country, where the dead end up, like the farm upstate where all the good dogs go at the end of their service, to consult Tiresias' ghost. At no point heretofore was it in any way evident that such a journey would be necessary just to get back home. One should have thought that favorable winds would have done the trick. Hence we might be justified in thinking that the revealing of this necessity is the practical takeaway of the wisdom gained from sleeping with the goddess. There is no journey home except via death and the dead. Apparently Odysseus must hear an oracle from among them, whose content nobody yet knows, and no spoilers. None of this is on our horizon when we begin the passage. Odysseus is on his way to the ship to persuade the remaining crew, at Circe's encouragement, to store their stuff and come join the party at her house. These are men who have never ventured from the ship and shore since they arrived on the isle, together with Eurylochus, the man who had led the first expedition but never entered Circe's door. He had hid himself outside instead, and saw nothing of men turning into pigs, only men disappearing within to suffer who knows what. So we are dealing with two levels of possible initiate here, the most of them simply neophyte, while one of them is positively ignorant and prejudiced, and positively fearful. Odysseus finds them crying away, pouring down a lusty tear. When he approaches them, we are treated to one of the great similes, applied to all the men without distinction. As when the farmyard calves around the herd cows come back to the dung pile when they've had their fill of pasture, all jump around together as they face them, and no longer do the pens contain them, no, but with constant mooing and lowing they run around them, their mothers, So did those men, when they saw me with their own eyes, pile on me in tears. And it felt to them in their life's breath that they were there, as if they'd reached their father's earth and the city that belonged to them, of rugged Ithaca, where they were fed and they were born. Host hotan agrau loi pories peribus agelaias, eltos as escopron, epen botanes horizontai, pasai hamascai rosin in antiai. Odeti sacoi iscus al hadinon mucomanai ampiteosin materas. Hos emecenai pevidon ophthalmoisin dacruo ente secunto. Docase daraspisi tumos, hos emen, hos e patriticoiato cae polinauton, trace asitacas, hinat etrapon adegenonto. No longer do the pens contain them. Amidst all the richness, this is the bit that sticks out, at least for me. The pens into which we place and segregate domestic animals seem to have emerged as a metaphor for any number of kinds of social constraint. Everything from being pigeonholed in school, socially or academically, to the fateful constructs of class and caste seem to be kinds of constructed pens. Even in democracies so radical that they recognize personhood in a fetus, the subsequent children are nevertheless denuded of rights and separated into classes by age and aptitude. Many of us continue to mark our anniversaries by reunion in memory of our time together in those pens. Every corporation, institution, or workforce seems to segregate into the junior, senior, and executive, the officer and enlisted, and so on. The Cyclops pens off his lambs and kids by their state of development. Once Circe has fed Odysseus her spiked pottage, she says, "Off with you now to the sty, lay out with the rest of your comrades. Erce ho nun supeonde metallon lexo hetairon." It is as though the penning them in the sty is as much a part of Circe's control over humans as her turning them into pigs. They are put in their proper place. Later we shall meet a man, a swineherd, who pens himself in on purpose, builds his own pen for a steading. Perhaps we are also to think of the wall built around a city, as is described on our first sight of Phaeacia, as a kind of enclosure. So when in the simile the young calves burst out their pens, there is a rather wonderful sensation of freedom. It is at the same time a restoration of their natural rights to be reunited with their mother cows, who have been separated from them to go to pasture for the sake of the production of milk and the fattening of meat. The repatriation restores the benefits of nature and nurture to its exploited and deprived children. Repatriation is an oddly fitting word for what is described. In Odysseus, his men at the shore see not only their mother, as the calves their dams, but their native land, its polity and its rocky pasture. For the moment, Odysseus is their home, and return home means restoration to Odysseus. They evidently believe that their comrades have been destroyed. After they repeat in their own voice the sentiment of the simile, that their joy at Odysseus' return is such as if they had arrived in Ithaca, they ask him to recount the tale of their compatriot's death. It must be noted, for all that it slips one's attention, that Odysseus himself is the source both of the simile describing their welcome and the loving words of his men. How strange when one turns the narrative upon the teller. Odysseus is building himself up like a demagogue. I am your mother. I am your home. I am your nation. The self-idolizing sits alongside the humbleness of the image he paints. For the nursing cows, home is a dung heap. My teacher and his partner used to keep a dairy herd. She would always complain about the ladies' habit of waiting till they got home to the milking stalls to have a shit. It meant a lot of mucking out for her, and it seemed to her that the cows meant their timing spitefully. They had all those hours in the field, after all, to do their manuring. Every human habitation is never far from its dung pile, even if the stuff is nowadays piped away. To long for home is to long for the aroma of your native dung pile. How is this a thing to wish for, over abundance and the goddess attentions on a wooded isle? Rise and follow me, says Odysseus, although not so they would become fishers of men. These would instead be the Lastrygonians, the giants in Book 10, line 124. It always pays to note the changes when Homer's speakers appear to repeat lines they were instructed to say. At first, Odysseus repeats Circe's imperatives about storing their tackles in caves by the shore. She herself just adds, to paraphrase, then come back and bring your friends. But Odysseus here himself adopts the imperative voice, as he stands forth as demagogue and saviour, who claims he can restore the lost boys to his men's sight. But yourselves, look sharp, all of you together, and follow me, so you may see your comrades in the sacred house of Circe, drinking and eating, for they've got an unending supply. Odysseus says he will guide his initiates to the eternal feast under the goddess roof. He will drink the wine new with them in her house. But there is a gadfly buzzing to annoy the reverie. His name is Eurylochus. The men in Odysseus' entourage only seem to earn a name when they serve the narrator's ends. What a strange creature this is, then, from the perspective of the self-heroizing narrator. Could Freud or Jung make sense of his role? Or is he a comic Satan? Odysseus drops an intriguing detail when he is deciding whether to execute the man summarily for his apparent democratic resistance and speaking truth to power. Here is another instance of, quote, drawing the sword from by his thigh to do an unmanly thing. Whether I draw my tapered sword from by my thick thigh, cut off his head with that, introduce it to the ground, even if he was my in-law, pretty close kin. The little aside and revelation that Odysseus' enemy is actually his in-law plays like a line from situation comedy, in the midst of a rumination on a summary beheading. Eurylochus is Odysseus' kin by marriage. Paos? Could that make him, in the stagecraft of Odysseus' psyche, an avatar of Penelope herself? Or is he just the first ever comic deployment of the useless in-law? The former may be a possibility to consider when we assess the contra speech in the proposition that they all trek to Circe's house, the speech by Eurylochus that immediately turns the people's would-be saviour murderous. Here is what Eurylochus had said. Ah, my losers, Where are we going? Why do you desire these evils, to make the descent to Circe's room, she who'll turn the lot of us into pigs or wolves, or else she'll make us lions, who'd guard her big house for her, even by force, just like the Cyclops did when they arrived in his inner court, our comrades, and with them followed that Mr. Bold, Odysseus, for that's on him. Due his outrageous recklessness, they also were lost. Deloi posimen, tica con hi merete tuton, Kirkas es megaron katabamenai, häken hapantas, asus ave lukos poiasetai, ave leontas, hoiken hoi megadoma pulassoi men kai anankei. Hos per kuklops works, hote hoi messaulon hicondo, ha meteroi hetaroi, sund hot rasus hepet odussos. Tuto gar kai kenoi atastali eisino lonto. Note, make the descent, katabamenai. Presently they are speaking on the seashore, so descent makes no literal sense. It may be that Circe's abode in the woods is circled by higher ground, as Odysseus first espies its smoke in the interior after climbing to a lookout point. The concept of katabasis, walk down, resonates, however, with the language of mystic initiation. In the rites associated with Orpheus, the candidate enacts a descent into the underworld. The experience there ends with anabasis, walk up, a return to the light. Eurylochus' choice of verb prefigures the men's own eventual descent into Hades, about which we of course know nothing yet, but it also points him up as only a partial initiate, a man who has developed conspiracy theories while surveilling Circe's house from behind the bushes. Remember, he does not know what happened to the men under his charge, only that they vanished. He now speculates about them being turned into pigs, wolves, or lions, but it was only wolves and lions, acting like solicitous dogs, whom he saw in front of the building. He did not see any pigs. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. He follows that, however, with an observation which cuts Odysseus to the bone. His summary of the disastrous expedition into the house of the anthropophagist Polyphemus. Eurylochus' use of inner court suggests that he did not know that the Cyclops lived in a cave, and once again, he may not have been there in the party that had had the adventure, but had stayed shipside. His taunt of, quote, that rash one, Mr. Bold, Hotrasus, seems to me, for some reason, a dig worthy of Penelope herself. His final line is simply incontrovertible, and Odysseus says as much by putting it in Eurylochus' mouth without gainsaying it, except by contemplating beheading the speaker. If you men follow Odysseus now, watch out. It was due to his abject folly that those men as well, our comrades, were killed. Note especially Eurylochus' somewhat contradictory assertion that Mr. Bold merely followed along, sunt hepet, with our comrades, ha meteroi hetaroi. The confident salvific leader who has just emerged in his pomp to say, follow me, is immediately riposted by his opponent as a tagger along. To imply that Odysseus' proudest victory was one where he merely followed along, and to point out the truth that to those left behind, the expedition had not been one where Odysseus ingeniously saved his men, but lost them, is undoubtedly to trigger Odysseus, as the saying now is. Eurylochus is debating to win the election, not to inform the argument. It is the neophytes in the audience who restrain Odysseus from the cold-blooded murder of Penelope's cousin. They also play a crucial role in the ever-complexifying portrayal of the narrator's psyche. Every time he gives voice to these personas, as here when the uninitiated members of Odysseus' crew are given a speech, even though they remain anonymous, the performer embodies them as if they have bubbled up from within him. The layered unity of this performer, who first of all plays Homer, who presently is playing Odysseus, who in turn plays himself alongside his mostly unnamed crew in telling the story, encourages us, or at least allows us, in the singleness of his own body before us, to see these embodiments as aspects of the hero's own psyche. On the other hand, often when he comes to a speech, the performer before us is more like a medium in a séance, whose body is inhabited by different alien psyches, each with their own complexities. This analogy becomes especially fitting when we are amongst the souls in Hades. But this is also the normal modus of one-man theatre. The performer's art is such that we see the character, not the actor. When he seeks companionship in his favorite ram, or prays desperately to his father Poseidon, Odysseus, the narrator, fully inhabits the Cyclops, sees through what is left of his eyes. Homer becomes also Zeus and Penelope, Helen and Telemachus. It just seems that in the case of Odysseus and his crew, we are on different ground. We see the actor more than the characters, in the sense that this actor is Odysseus himself, the storyteller as well as the hero. This opens up their moments to the various kind of psychological or allegorical interpretation, unlike those more usual occasions when the intent of the performer is to establish the independent reality before us of the inhabited figure. The most intriguing case of all, to my mind, is how we register the presence of Athena. She inhabits the whole poem, it seems, as well as poet, hero, and audience, in the most uncanny way. We've already had reason to view Odysseus and his mostly anonymous crew as a kind of single partitioned psyche. It is, for example, exactly when the gatekeeper, to say Odysseus, falls asleep within sight of Ithaca, that the repressed men, with their Medusa's head of appetites, voice their misgivings about their captain's apparent self-aggrandizement and secret wealth, and open up the bag of Aeolian winds. That's in 38 to 45 of Book 10. At that point, the ringleader remained anonymous, but he sounds like Eurylochus. That lack of self-control in the collective sense ended in disaster. Here the crew intercedes with softening lines and prevents a beheading by proposing Eurylochus remain behind. "You sport, let's allow that this man, if you so order it, remain here by the ship and protect her as well. But for us, do you be the guide to the holy house of Circe." The crew seem persuaded by their restored dear leader that he will be the guide to a promised land. The lower psyche has gone MAGA. In general, the initiated lead the candidates through the hurdles, like a sponsor at AA or godparents at a baptism. Odysseus is their man. They have been captivated by the thought of eating and drinking at a perpetual feast in God's house. Odysseus evidently takes satisfaction in the fact that Eurylochus did not stay alone by the ship, but himself slunk along behind. He followed instead, quotes, the loser. Circe's speech to Odysseus and his men, once she's bathed them and anointed them and they've reunited tearfully with their teammates who had been pigs, is so weirdly timeless that I must recount it in full. Zeus-born son of Laertes, contriver Odysseus, no longer now trigger the full-throated grieving, for I know it even on my own, how often, to begin with, you all suffered pains in the deep filled with fishes, and then how often weird, cruel men have done you violence on dry land. No, come on, get to eating food and drinking wine, until you grab that life's breath back into your chests. What you were when first you left behind the Mother Earth of your fathers in rugged Ithaca. But now you're legless and spiritless, always your dangerous wandering occupies your mind, and never in you the life's breath enjoys a state of peace, since oh, so many things you suffered. She sounds, for all the world, like the hostess at a self-help retreat. You're here to be restored to your best self. Turn your minds away from the stresses of work and cutthroat competition. Grab that life's breath back into your chests. Odysseus and his men are not self-pitying businessmen, however, but soldiers and sailors who have suffered deeply at war and on the sea. I admit I find the speech deeply moving, to hear some real sympathy from God, with a genuine feel for what might really do these harried and weary men some good. Most strangely affecting is the re-echoing phrase, the Mother Earth of your fathers, Patris Gaia, coming from the mouth of the goddess. What could it mean to such an one as her? She wishes to restore all of them to their youth, to what they were in figure and aspiration when first they set off into the fateful vortex of Troy. The daughter of the sun would give us back our days. It seems almost too good to be true. So she spoke, and again our manly life's breath began to be persuaded. So in that place through all the days, up to a year fulfilling, we sit dining on flesh beyond reckoning, along with pleasing alcohol. Something smells off, does it not? Have they not become like the lotus eaters, and forgotten who they are and why they care? And this is so soon after the arrival at the goddess house has been played up to be an ascendance of the soul. Turns out it is just another test of resolve on their journey. At least some of these, not Odysseus, are men who've been pigs, but that experience does not seem to have dulled their taste for pork. It would seem a stretch to suggest that Homer was anything but an omnivore like the most of us, but it is his own emphases which raise the matter. Circe's first meal for Odysseus' men, which included her drugs, had been vegetarian. Barley, as I understand it, is an annual plant in any case, so there is no question of sacrifice. But also the other ingredients, honey, milk, and wine, do not involve the sacrifice of an animate being. The goddess considered that mixture to constitute human sustenance, unlike the acorns she threw her guests when they had become pigs. In Calypso's house, gods were served ambrosia and nectar, while the human got something else. Quote, all such food for eating and drinking as mortal men consume. but we are not informed what Circe ate, if anything. It does seem important that Odysseus and his men are said to eat, quote, flesh beyond reckoning, crea aspeta. The use of crea is pointed. I think we have here the final punchline to the joke that began when Odysseus wouldn't touch his food before he saw his men turned back into men. Perhaps that was in case they were to be the entree. Nothing about their transformation has transformed them. Men are men, and men are pigs, who will nevertheless not stop eating barbecued pig. Recall that the arrival on Aiaia, Circe's isle, is marked by a moment of profound disorientation. Odysseus and his men do not know where the sun went down and where it rose again. Now, in one line, a whole year passes. The word for year, eniautos, seems to refer to the sun returning to the same place on the horizon. Circe is Helios' daughter. Perhaps hers is a fitting place for a year's solar observation and correlation with the seasons to re-establish cardinal points from her sea-encircled isle. But when the same time of year turned up and the seasons went round, while the moons waned and the long days came to an end, it seems it is only the irresistible smell of home, the local dung heap, which will awaken the men from their enchanted slumber. And it is the crew at the bottom of the psychological hierarchy who make the move against His Highness Odysseus. Divinity, enough already. Remember now the land of your fathers, if it is God's decree that you be rescued and returned there, to the home with the high roof and your own, the Mother Earth of your fathers. They as much as call him a god. Perhaps there's a hint that he needs pulling down from his high bed. But Odysseus does not resist. He says his manly life's breath was persuaded. He waits for one more day of eating limitless flesh and pleasing mead, but at night he once more climbs onto Circe's gorgeous bed and makes his plea for passage home. Here he suggests that it was not only just now, after a year, that the men started pestering him, but that they had actually been wasting away his heart for a while, whenever Circe had, quote, gone off somewhere. That's a charming touch, whether or not it's true. So Circe drops her bomb. They need no longer stay at her house any more, although it is implied that they could if they were willing. But there is first a need that you complete another journey and arrive in the house of Hades' invisible and awesome Persephone, to consult the oracular soul of the Theban Tiresias, the blind prophet whose mind's vessels are yet grounded. Even though he's dead, she gave him a mind, Persephone. To be honest, he alone. The rest flit around as shadows. The word grounded, describing Tiresias' phrenes, is the same word empedoi, as describes the mind of Odysseus' men when their bodies had transformed into pigs. I think I shall change my translation from steady to grounded there as well, for being more literal. We shall discuss Circe's instructions and, of course, the journey to the invisible world in due course. Odysseus calls for a guide. He has gone in the passage from pronouncing himself a guide and leader on the journey to the house of God to once again what Eurylochus called him in mockery, a follower. But for now, as the text for an initiate's advice to which to hang on and consult through what follows. Consider Odysseus' reaction to Circe's news. So she spoke, but my own heart was shattered. I started crying, sitting there in the bed, nor did my heart now want to live any longer and to see the light of Helios. Get it? Once again, that there is a joke. Not for the first time, by my reckoning, Odysseus is suicidal. Now, what better way to get to Hades quicker, perhaps immediately, and without the need for a guide or a crew or a ship, on your schedule to boot, than suicide? Or better yet, get Circe to fix you up a special savoury potion, so to cease upon the midnight with no pain. To my mind, the sort of person who makes such a joke about the easy way to get to Hades, to die, is not someone who takes seriously fairy stories about empirical journeys to the underworld. I'm telling anyone who will listen that Homer is post-Orphic, post-Christian, post-religious, and postmodern. So here is my now well-worn maxim for those following with me on this journey through the Odyssey. The Odyssey is comedy.